I remember way back when they first announced plans to make an animated Miles Morales movie. I wondered how they could possibly pull it off and what it would even look like. Into the Spider-Verse revolutionized animation. That's not a secret. The style was bold and expressive, and now you could see it being replicated everywhere. Unfortunately, as more and more films adopt this style, it might get repetitive if they're not done correctly. I don't know how they did it, but Across the Spider-Verse improved on the art style from the first one. Into the Spider-Verse had this soul to it, a passion and fluidity that continues to make it stand out, even to this day. Across the Spider-Verse doubles down on this and really goes all out with its different animation styles. Obviously, characters like Miles, Gwen, Peter, Miguel, they are heavy hitters. The main characters interact the most and are on screen the most. They will be animated mostly the same. I mean, in the first movie, we were supposed to believe Gwen was from Earth 1610. Their animation style is the style of the Spider-Verse films as a whole, the baseline. Spider-Gwen. Music. Yeah, drumming? Music? The first movie had characters that weren't as well versed with other forms of media, so a lot of their style was probably built from the ground up in the Spider-Verse style. Let's be honest. As experimental as the film was, if I took PNGs of all the characters, you would be able to tell they were from the same movie. Across the Spider-Verse had a lot more cameos and Spider-People from different movies, games, and shows. Most of them already came with their own unique look, but even those who didn't have an established style still had their own quirks that made them stand out. The scene where everyone is chasing Miles? I can't even imagine how long that took to animate. We got characters like Insomniac Spider-Man, who looks like he was ripped straight from the game. He was so crisp. I mean, it's a PlayStation game, so it was probably rendered in 4K, running at 60 frames per second, and cost $4 billion. Spider-Punk took 4 years to make, and each part of his clothing was animated at a different frame rate. Easily one of the more stylistic additions that took over any scene he was in. Ben Reilly? I'm pretty sure he was cel-shaded, which I can only describe as refreshing because I don't see that used outside of Zelda. And Childish Gambino, straight up being in live action, he wasn't even animated. This was hands down my favorite cameo in the movie, which, side tangent, his inclusion in this film is immaculate. In 2017, Marvel Studios released Spider-Man Homecoming that saw Donald Glover as Aaron Davis, the Prowler, and his second appearance as the character is over 6 years later in a separate film franchise? Why? Donald Glover contributed so much to Miles Morales. I'm glad that someone finally gave him the call back to put the suit on. The MCU usually gets a lot of wins with the multiverse stuff, but that's an L. That is sad. It's a 9 to 5 in Chicago taking the L. EGO, can we talk about this? Lego Spider-Man? I feel like at this point, I don't need to prove to you that Lego Marvel Superheroes is a game that I really enjoy, and that version of Spider-Man is unironically one of my favorites. I was hoping that he would be in this movie, and to know that this scene was animated by a 14-year-old, it's simply amazing that they saw his work and got him to animate for the actual film. Main character energy of the decade. But that's just a perfect example of the creative ingenuity that goes into the Spider-Verse films. They're willing to go out and experiment with things that you would never consider. Even as other studios are starting to break into the Spider-Verse aesthetic, they will never surpass the original because of that spirit and passion to do what hasn't been done. Isn't that the whole theme of Spider-Verse? To do your own thing? And that's exactly what we see on screen. Everyone's own thing. They had the courage to look at all of that and say, yeah, let's try it. The dynamic between Miles and Gwen is truly something special. There's a sense of belonging the two have lost up until this point. They feel misplaced, like they aren't quite right for the world that they're in. And as someone who is biracial, I cannot express to you how it felt to watch these two on screen, seeing them find that belonging with each other, watching them swing together, explore together, or even just talk. Growing a connection as they bonded over what they had in common. Not very often do I get characters like Gwen and Miles. They had serenity, playing on the same beat despite being two different songs. I felt I could resonate with both of their journeys of self-acceptance because it wasn't just seeing characters that were like me, but rather seeing characters that I could be like. A lot of people were calling back to an initial statement about the film, saying that it was going to be a love story between Giles and Gwen. Now that the movie is out, people didn't really pick up on that. Well, maybe it's just not the story you thought it would be. Because over here, from my perspective, seems a bit like someone struggling with the fact that the outside forces won't let her be with who she wants to be with, resulting in both of them being isolated. That's another thing I love about their relationship. They teach each other new perspectives. An often overlooked aspect in films is how people react to the things around them. How a person handles the information could be just as important as the situation itself. It was one thing for Miles to stand up to Miguel. It was another for Gwen to echo that. Bonus note about these two. I noticed that Morbius reference. When they're swinging through the city, Gwen is telling Miles about all the different spider people. She describes Miguel as like a ninja vampire Spider-Man, but he's a good guy. Miles' response to this is a vampire good guy? I'd pay a lot of money to see that. It's an obvious jab at Morbius and the fact that it was memed into a re-release that resulted in it bombing at the box office twice. I know, I worked at the theater, I was there. Genuinely one of my favorite lines. Said it in Guardians, best types of fourth wall breaks. Speaking a bit more on Gwen, I really love her story in this movie. Having her learn to weigh the odds of what she considers important. Across the Spider-Verse puts a bigger spotlight on Gwen, opening the film with her and providing a little bit more context as to where she's at. It's when she reveals to her father that she is Spider-Woman that this isolation from her home world starts. Being tempted to join the super secret Spider Society after he essentially turns his back on her. Gwen reflects the overall themes of feeling alone and wanting that sense of belonging, somewhat aligning with what Miles' mom says too. Fighting to not get kicked out of the Spider Club after getting too distracted. She becomes hard-pressed to follow the rules because she doesn't feel welcome in her own home and doesn't want to be sent back. This is where her rift with Miles really finds its catalyst. Between her relationship with him and her relationship with the Homeowners Association, she was trying to satisfy both. But this is Spider-Man. You can't do both. Her intentions may have been to let Miles down easy. I'm talking about the spider people. However, Gwen basically did to Miles what her father did to her. Instead of being open and having an honest conversation, she chose to follow the Spider Corp handbook and ended up alienating him. She watched him literally shake his head and leave. When Gwen gets back home, she has that discussion with her dad, opening up about what it means for her to be Spider-Woman and accepting this part of herself for what it is. There's definitely an allegory for being transgender here, which whether or not they decide to take that route with Gwen herself, the opportunity for the symbolism was there, and I'm glad that they took it. In an attempt to regain some sort of belonging, Gwen hurt the person she had a real connection with. Now, she's starting her own band. Asking if we want in is signifying that anyone could be a part of this. You don't have to abide by predetermined rules or follow a specific story. Also, when Gwen is being sent home, she looks at Miguel and says,
"We are supposed to be the good guys."
Calling back to the Morbius line where she said that he was a good guy despite the typically evil attributes of a vampire. Good money. It comments on those attributes taking over Moon Knight. Man, not only did they make a Morbius joke, they made it plot relevant. Let Gwen be a lesson, guys. Tell your friends vital information, especially if they're a potential love interest. Especially if everyone already knows. You're not saving anything hesitating. I mean, look at Miles. You don't want him finding out there's someone slipping up in an unfavorable time? Come on! Gwen's a really moving story, and I cannot wait to see where this takes her in Beyond the Spider-Verse. I mean, I'm guessing it would take her beyond the Spider-Verse. I should write these movies. I may be the first person to say this. I kinda don't want the other three Spider-Men in Beyond the Spider-Verse. At least not as main characters. Reason being is that Spider-Verse doesn't need them. More specifically, Miles doesn't need them. Into the Spider-Verse set itself apart from other interpretations. Not only was it expressive in an entirely different way with its animation, but it was a new story as well. The past 2 decades have been retreading the same story of Peter Parker, to where even Marvel decided to skip the origin when they got to Tom. For better or for worse, the worlds, we see in Spider-Verse were built off of Miles' story. With Across the Spider-Verse now out and bringing us further into this world, it's at the point where having Tobey, Tom, and Drew wouldn't feel natural. Not to mention that the filmmakers have already tried a couple of times to incorporate more of the other Peters, but even they realized that it just wasn't working. It's not like No Way Home, where it was relying on what came before. The story was based around the villains of the previous films breaking into Tom's world. It gave reason for Andrew and Tobey to hop over because they were tied to the main conflict. The two were also able to give Tom's Peter a little bit of guidance because it was their villains, and in a way, it was their story too. Whereas with Spider-Verse, it doesn't go outside the 2 films with its story. Miles doesn't need that guidance from the others. It may be a multiverse, but there's less of a motivating reason for the other Spiders to appear. Which brings me into my next concern about them in Beyond the Spider-Verse. What would they even do? Yeah, you got some silverware, but really? Are you eating though? Tobey and Andrew, already had their arcs completed with No Way Home. There isn't much of a character to have. Is Andrew gonna redeem himself again? Are they gonna do With Great Power for what, the 4th time? Is Tom gonna try and bring in an Avengers perspective? They already got Lego Spider-Man. He's got like 4 different versions of those guys. Just ask him. Oh, well, Miles, you should ask him. He's fought an alien on Earth And in space.
He was purple.
Yeah, he's in a band. The three aren't tied to the main story of Spider-Verse, and there isn't too much that they could add to their existing stories. Again, for the two Spiders of yesteryear, they already resolved the conflicts that their films were built off of. The effect Osborn's death had on the Raimi trilogy, and Gwen's death being what the web films ultimately led to. So, realistically, what can they do that's meaningful? Maybe Tom will finally square off against famous Spider-Man villain Beetle. However, even launching him into another universe just to end up with everyone else again feels like it would undermine the ending of No Way Home. With just how much is being set up for Beyond the Spider-Verse already, it would become way too crowded to have the other three as anything more than quick cameos. We don't need No Way Home 2. We don't need Andrew getting PTSD over Gwen or Tom introducing Secret Wars. These movies are Miles' story, and the last thing it needs is people saying, Beyond the Spider-Verse once again confirms who the greatest Spider-Man really is. Tobey Maguire. Whatever we get, I just hope there isn't a scene where they're like, whoa, we're all Spider-Man, but you're not like us. You know? Because he's animated, but also black. Like what they did with Electro. He thought Andrew was black because he helped poor people? Who wrote this? Lotus? Overall, I do have faith in the Spider-Verse team. They seem to be pretty good at identifying bad ideas. Plus, they have more time now. The trilogy could still reach that satisfying conclusion even if the other Peters are incorporated in the film. Would it be cool to see the other three come back? Yeah, of course. But risking having that take away from what has been building here? Not a chance. They made these films about Miles for a reason. Let him do his own thing.